Did you just buy a super cute stamp and when you went to use it in your journal, it did this? Let's talk about 4 kinds of stamp pads. Hey everyone, it's Niko from Oseka here, and today we're going to be going over 4 kinds of stamp pads and seeing how they perform on different paper. Let's do it. Before we begin our tests, I wanted to go over some things about paper that might impact how your stamp performs. First, it's going to be the absorbency or porosity of your paper, so this will impact how well the stamp dries into it and also could impact things like bleeding or ghosting and also feathering. Second is going to be if your paper is coated or non-coated. If your paper is coated, it's going to have a little thin layer of kind of like a waxy material on it, so this makes it so the paper is less absorbent. But usually coated paper is going to be a little bit thinner, so this can also impact all those factors we just talked about. The final piece is going to be your paper's GSM. So that is going to be how thick the paper is. So a paper with a higher GSM will have less of a chance of ghosting or bleeding, whereas a paper with a lower GSM might have more of those issues. Next, we're going to take a look at all the different kinds of stamp pads we're going to be using today. So today we've got 4 types, as I mentioned before. First up, we have solvent-based ones. This one is by StazOn in the color Jet Black. Solvent-based inks are kind of known for their versatility. They're going to be very pigmented and they're going to be able to stick to surfaces like glass, metal, wood, vinyl, leather, whatever. Up next, we've got chalk-based ones. This is the Dewdrop Multi-Surface Chalk Ink Versamagic in the color Midnight Black. Chalk inks are going to be a little more semi-opaque, so they're not going to have as strong of an effect, but they are archival and waterproof. Up next, we've got pigment-based ones. So this is the one we're using today. This is the Dewdrop Fast Drying Pigment Ink Brilliance in the color Coffee Bean. These are also water resistant and archival, just like the chalk ones, but these can also be used on a variety of surfaces, just like the solvent-based ones. So these can be used on things like photos, metal, leather, kind of all the same materials as the solvent-based ones. And then last but not least, we've got oil-based ink pads. Today we're using this Shachihara Iromo Yo pad in the color Sumi ink, so it's black. So this is an oil-based pigment ink and it's going to produce a bit of a sharper image. It's also going to be more quick drying and also smudge proof and waterproof. Let's test everything out. I've gone ahead and pre-stamped some notebooks with the 4 types of stamp pads we're looking at today. So we've got solvent, pigment, chalk, and oil. And we're just going to go through and look at the bleeding or ghosting on the back page, and then we're going to see how it performs when we take a water-based marker and go over it. So up first we have Tomoe River paper. This is coated in around 52 GSM, so on the thinner side. As you can see, the colors lay pretty well on this one. If we go ahead and flip back to the previous page, we see that the solvent-based ink bled through quite a bit, whereas the other 3, we just have more of some ghosting going on, especially on the oil one. Okay, we're going to go through and go over this with a water-based marker now to see if it smudges or not. Today I'm using a mild liner in the color Coral Pink. So we're just gonna get the highlighter out and just go right through these. All right, so none of these smudged. They all performed pretty well. We don't see any of the pigment or anything bleeding into that highlighter, which is really great. I would say it's safe to use any of these 4 in combination with water-based pigment on top, but again, you're going to want to compare the bleeding and ghosting on this one because some people have certain preferences. So yeah, the solvent definitely performed the worst with quite a bit of bleed through. And then I think oil is the second worst, and then chalk and pigment are both pretty even in terms of how much ghosting they're doing in the Tomoe River paper. All right, next we're going to move on to MD paper. So MD paper is non-coated and it's around 80 to 90 GSM. This is the paper you'll find in MD notebooks and also in travelers as well. As you can see here, I pre-stamped them just like I did with the Tomoe River paper. And if we flip back here, we'll see that actually the solvent didn't bleed nearly quite as badly as it did when you compare it to the Tomoe River paper. But there is still quite a bit of ghosting with all 4 in this one. Because this paper has a slightly higher GSM, I think that's what protected it from having as bad of a bleed through as the Tomoe River paper had. I think all 4 of these are pretty safe for MD paper. Definitely with solvent, you kind of run the risk of having a bit of bleed through, but as for the other 3, pigment, chalk, and oil, they all have pretty minimal ghosting. Let's go through with the water-based marker now. All right. Just like with the Tomoe River paper, this one had no smudging on any of the 4. So if you're someone who goes through and adds things with like your highlighters or watercolor or anything, you would be safe with all 4 of these in the MD paper. Onto our final test, which is using Leuchtturm paper. This paper is slightly coated and 80 GSM. So if we take a look, we see that there is a little bit more ghosting than we saw with the MD paper, but not as bad as the Tomoe River paper. There is a bit more bleed through on the solvent-based one than the MD paper had, but it is, I would say, in between the MD and the Hobonichi Tomoe River paper. The oil-based ink also had a little bit more ghosting than the chalk and pigment did in this one as well. Okay, we're gonna go through with our highlighter now. All right. With this one, the solvent, pigment, and oil-based inks performed totally fine. However, the chalk ink actually did have a bit of smudging. As you can see where the highlighter swiped through the stamp there, the ink did bleed a little bit and it did smudge. I think with the Leuchtturm paper, you would be best going with the pigment, chalk, or oil ink, but the paper is a little bit on the thicker side than what the Tomoe River paper is. So I think that the effects are quite minimal compared to that one. All right, here's a final comparison of the 3 papers side by side. So this was the Tomoe River paper, MD paper, and Leuchtturm paper. The solvent-based ink pad clearly had the worst ghosting and bleeding through all the papers. I think the chalk and pigment all performed pretty well, pretty evenly with minimal ghosting across the 3 papers. The oil is a little bit, I think it depends a little bit on how hard you press, but also the paper for sure. I think the ghosting is worse on the Tomoe River paper than the other 2, I would say, but with the Leuchtturm one, it is bleeding through a little bit. Some things to note is that if you're using pigment or chalk stamp pads, these are noted to be semi-opaque, so the colors are not gonna be as vibrant as they are with the other 3. So that is one thing to note. Also, if you're using a lighter colored ink, like if you're using a light pink or a light blue, the bleeding or ghosting might not be as severe as it is with this dark black. We did let these dry for around 3 minutes or so after stamping them, and I think that was enough time for them to fully dry down without having issues of smudging. So I would definitely recommend after stamping, giving it a little bit to really settle in so it can perform its best. All right, well that concludes this video. We hope that this was helpful for you guys at home to kind of see how the 4 different kinds of stamp pads react to different paper, whether it's coated, has a higher GSM and whatnot. You can kind of compare it to the notebooks you have at home and see what stamp pad will work best for you. Thank you so much for watching. Give us a like if you found this video helpful and let us know in the comments what kind of journal you're using and if you've had good or bad experiences with any of these stamp pads. Thanks for watching. Bye.